Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The new Andhra Pradesh government, the Telugu Desam government under Chandrababu Naidu, has produced a white paper on power sector in this state. Obviously, it's a white paper on the performance of the previous government, so they'll be saying that everything was wrong. The fact is that a lot has been wrong. However, the white paper has facts, and these facts are verifiable. Where you might have arguments is what caused these issues to happen. However, there's a larger issue. The larger issue is India's power sector is a never-ending tragedy. I can't even call it Shakespearean tragedy, right? Because it is as sad as that. Because a Shakespearean tragedy also ends, right? There is a tragic end, and then maybe something else comes up. It's Hamlet one day, that story is over, then Macbeth, that story ends, and it goes on like that. But with India's power sector, it is like Shakespeare on steroids, or it's like a Shakespearean OTT, which is never ending. 52 episodes and more to come, right? India's power sector, Mirzapur of India's power sector, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There is no end to it because state after state, the same story plays out. Almost all the states. And what is the story now? It's gotten worse. First, you don't charge people enough. First, you say, I'm giving farmers free power. Then I'm giving my village domestic at this rate, this domestic at this rate, industry at this rate, continuous process industry at this rate, etc., etc., etc. And so everybody in the power business, power consumers, power distributors, power producers, and most of all, those lending to power distributors, producers, and sellers and power consumers, which means the banks and lending institutions are all broke. That is the story of Indian power sector, on top of which now there is this competitive business of offering free power to the voters on the eve of every elections. Main 200 unit, main 300 unit, main 400 unit, right? Where will that power come from? Power. India produces surplus power right now. And India is in a tragic situation. Once again, the mother and the father and the grandmother and the grandfather, or you might say the offspring of this larger power tragedy. You can see it this way, or you can see it that way. The outcome of this larger power tragedy is that India has surplus power, but Indian consumers by and large are either short of power, they are suffering from power cuts, or they are paying too much for power. That's because all of India's power economics is broken. India's power economics is broken because India's power politics, not power politics as in who gets how many seats, but power politics in terms of the electricity politics is broken, and that has many consequences. So when we look at this white paper, short white paper, just 13 pages from Andhra Pradesh government, we see it, one, to understand what's happened in Andhra Pradesh, but also to get a larger idea of what's wrong with India's power sector. Now, this is a white paper by the incoming government, so obviously you expect them to say that things were much better when they were in power, which was just before the government that they just defeated. So 2014-15 to 2018-19, Chandrababu Naidu was in power. After that came Jagan Mohan Reddy's government of the YSRCP. So he, in fact, takes you back in this white paper to 1998, 2003, when Chandrababu Naidu was chief minister. And it is true, as is claimed in the white paper, it is true that Andhra Pradesh was the first state to bite the bullet, if I may use that expression, by reforming, by carrying out basic reforms in its electricity sector. Until then, you might remember, all of the electricity generation, distribution, billing, transmission was done by state electricity boards. In Delhi also, we had something called DESU, Delhi Electricity Supply Undertaking, those were the days when you didn't get your bills for 6 months. You also didn't get your power a lot of the time, right? And even if you went to pay your bills, you had to queue up. There were long queues, and by the time your turn came, the guy would say, I'm going for lunch, and would never turn up. So paying your bill was a challenge, right? And from then, we moved on. So the basic reform from all of that came from a thought process. And what was the thought process? The thought process was that how come all of India has electricity trouble, electricity shortage, very bad quality electricity, but Mumbai doesn't have it, Ahmedabad doesn't have it, and for heaven's sake, Kolkata doesn't have it. What was common between those three cities, right? One almost always run by the Congress party, Mumbai. One often run by the BJP, that is Gujarat, BJP or other coalitions like Chimanbhai Patel's coalition at one point of time. The third run by the left a lot of the time. That's because these three cities had private power distribution or at least corporatized power distribution. So the thought process was that, okay, it may be onerous to expect all states to allow private companies to start distributing and selling power, but at least they can set up their own corporations. So that led to corporatization of state electricity boards. So most states, barring one or two right now, most states carried out the process of what is called as unbundling of their electricity boards. Unbundling means creating different divisions which were then made into autonomous, government-owned autonomous corporations. So there was a Genco means a generation company. There was a Distco, which is a distribution company. And there was a Transco, which is a transmission company. So each one was a corporate entity headed by usually an IS officer. The prices for the consumers, the prices that they could charge, the prices that the distribution company could be charged by the generation company, the charges that the transmission company could charge the distributor and the producer for transmitting the power. All of that responsibility was given again to an autonomous independent regulator, which was the State Electricity Regulatory Commission. Most states in the country have that by now. If the odd state like West Bengal doesn't have it, you don't see it that much because the city of Kolkata has had private power distribution, CESC, for a long time. That is, in fact, that is the engine that's driven the RP Goenka group for a very long time. That said, Andhra Pradesh, when these ideas came up in the Vajpayee era, the ideas came up that other state governments also should unbundle their electricity boards and separate these functions so each one becomes a corporate entity and with its own balance sheet, right? And in case these run into losses, these will ultimately be the state government's responsibility because they are the only shareholders here. But the regulator will fix the tariffs. If the state government wants to give a subsidy, they can give that subsidy from the budget. The subsidy will not come from the distribution company or the generation company or the transmission company. This is so that the power economics will remain intact, and any badmashi that you want to do, I'm sorry to use that expression, any mischief, badmashi, or anything more entrepreneurial politically that you wanted to do by way of subsidizing this or subsidizing that, you had to pay for that from your budget. It looked like a neat plan, and Andhra Pradesh became the first state to accept that plan. And that happened in 1998. 1998, Andhra Pradesh carried out the unbundling, and the white paper claims that in the first 5 years of this reform, after Andhra became the first state to embrace this reform, their power shortage came down to just 1.5%, which was a significant improvement compared to the national average of 7.1%. Then they also say that in these 5 years, they curtailed their T&D losses, what is called as transmission and distribution losses. That's the correct expression for T&D, transmission and distribution losses. Although we sometimes in our cynical conversations tend to call this theft and dacoity losses. Theft and dacoity means what? Either somebody steals power through Kundi connection, or people don't pay for power, or people pay somebody and get power connections for which they are not built directly by the power producer or by the state, but they find a way of dealing with it. Like the old days in Delhi, when your electricity inspector came and said, "Why you bothered about the bill? Don't pay any bill. 3 years later, come to me. I will say 1,000 rupees or 1,000 units per month, and I will charge you one bill. All the money that you save, half is mine, half is yours." So those are theft and dacoity losses, or actually, my apologies, transmission and distribution losses. Andhra Pradesh government says that they reduced that in the first 5 years of reform from 35%, that means more than one third of the power produced was lost like this. That's where we've come from. It was like this in most of the states. Wasn't that much better even in Delhi. From 35%, it came down to 23% in 5 years. I know you'll be curious to know what it is right now. So I will tell you that right now in 2018-19, the last year of the Telugu Desam government, the previous Telugu Desam government under Chandrababu Naidu, it had come down to 11.93%. From 23% in 2003-4, it had halved. Now it is 9.5%, still too high, but for a state, it's for a state, not a city. It's much easier to control this in a city with private distribution. In most cities with private distribution, it's now either in low single digits or below 1%. Or thereabouts, because power should not be lost in transmission and distribution. But still, 9.5%, coming down from 35% is almost 1/4. That shows you the power of power sector reform. Now, these strides took place, and the white paper claims that in their times, in 2014-15, 2018-19, everything that should have gone up went up, and everything that should have gone down went down. So I told you that power deficit went down, transmission and distribution losses came down. That's what the white paper says. Peak demand went up by 39%. Good thing, people are consuming more power. Energy sales went up almost in a parallel way by 36%. When they started, there was a 22.5 million unit deficit in electricity availability. So this data, 39%, 36%, this is for the 1998-2003 period. Then you come to 2014. 2014, when Telugu Desam Party came back to power, their previous term, that is the government before Jagan's government, from 2014, in June 2014, they had a daily deficit of 22.5 million units of power. By December, the same year, they were almost even Stevens, and by January 2018, the state was power surplus. They also say that in these 5 years, the per capita power consumption went up by 23%, which was above the national average. The increase in national average was 17%, Andhra was 23%, and power generation, they claim in the white paper, went up by 174%. Now, all of this is important because the rest that comes now, that is the following 5 years, is to be seen in comparison with these. They also make claims with data that they made big improvements, big increases in power generation. The generation company, which is mostly the thermal company, increased by 75%. Solar generation went up by 4,514%, obviously because they started from a very low base, came up with more plants, etc. And wind capacity also went up by 458%, again started off a very low base. Now they say in the previous 5 years, the power sector has deteriorated in all areas, namely generation and capacity growth, receivables. Generation and capacity growth have been very slow. Receivables from the state government have gone up because state government says, I will give subsidy, but that subsidy the state government has to pay to its corporations, which they haven't been doing. And the white paper gives us data on what they haven't been doing. Number 3, they've been short-term power purchases, which has led to huge loans and tariff hikes at the cost of the consumers. Now, I will share with you at this point 2 graphics or 2 charts which we have taken from the white paper. So the first graphic is from page 2. It's basically giving you a comparison of the situation from 2014-15 to 2018-19. This was the earlier TDP era. So these are the claims that this TDP government is making about their performance in the previous TDP government, 2014-15 to 18-19. Then we come to our next graphic. Next graphic tells you what was the installed capacity and what were the other major parameters in 2018-19, the last year of the previous TDP government, and 2023-24, the last year of the outgoing Jagan government. And that tells you a rather sad story if you look at this data. All the data is on the screen in front of you. You will find some we will highlight, but you can also see, you can take your time, look at this carefully, and you will understand what's going on. So when you look at our graphic 2, which is a comparison of the situation as the previous TDP government left it in 2018-19 with 2023-24. So accumulated losses, for example, see this will be circled for you or highlighted for you. The accumulated losses of Andhra Pradesh Power Development Corporation Limited, or APPDCL, which is a subsidiary of AP Genco, the generation company of the state. Their accumulated losses went up from 1,565 crores to 6,240 crores. That's more than 4 times, right? Subsidy dues from the state government, they were already there. It's not as if the state government was perfect on its best behavior. In the previous TDP government, they already owed their power corporations 7,680 crores. Now they owe them 12,681 crores. Government arrears. Government arrears is the cutest thing of all. What are government arrears to your own power companies? These are bills that the government hasn't paid. All government offices which run air conditioners, fans, lights, computers, right? All of those bills the governments don't pay. It is those arrears. So governments are defaulters routinely across India's states. They're routinely defaulters to their own electricity companies or electricity distribution departments, where they still have departments. This, while they keep on promising free power, 200 units, 300 units, like that. So government arrears in Andhra Pradesh were 5,265 crores in 2018-19. Again, government was not perfect even in the first TDP era. Now it's 15,157 crores. It's almost 3 times. So these arrears by themselves, these add up to 27,848 crores. Not small change in a medium-sized state. Then the distribution company in the state. Again, look at the same graphic. It will tell you the first is generation companies, AP Genco and APPDCL, which is a subsidiary of AP Genco, the generation companies. The second is transmission companies. If you look at the transmission companies, once again, you can see that the accumulated losses have nearly doubled. But more importantly, when you come to the third section, which is the distribution companies, the discoms, that's where you see some real damage. That's where you see the subsidy dues which have gone up, government department arrears which have gone up. You can also see energy sales have increased, but not by that much, right? At a very small rate. You can also see that the short-term power cost per unit has gone up from about 4 rupees to 7.61 rupees. That's a very large increase of nearly more than 65%. That is very, very hefty. Accumulated loss, 29,000 crores, approximately to 34,000 crores. See, these figures will be highlighted as I talk. But there's one more very interesting factor, which is OPEX loan. What is an OPEX loan? These are operational loans, operational expenses. I presume paying salaries, rent, fuel for your vehicles, etc., etc., etc. Not for generating power, because these are distributing companies. So operational loans, operational expense loans have gone up from 11,806 crores to 54,007 crores. It's a disaster in all capitals. It's as bad as that. Now, all of this, the white paper says, force the government to increase tariffs. And they say that the government has been increasing tariffs and the consumers have been paying the price for the government's profligacy. freebie distribution, but also the government's inefficiency. And they don't say corruption, but I think there's a lot of hint there, because a lot of the earlier power purchase agreements, particularly with wind energy and solar energy suppliers, were cancelled and renegotiated. The contract with the builder of the Polavaram hydroelectric project, that contract was scrapped. That contract was given by the previous TDP government in 2017. The project was to be completed by 2023. In 2019, shortly after Jagan came to power, that project was scrapped. That contract was scrapped. The project was rebid. The new bid was granted later, and that deadline had now been fixed to 2026. So that power generation, which should have started in 2023, still hasn't started. The earlier contractor went into litigation. There were litigation costs, there were compensations, there were interest costs, cost overruns, plus because this power did not come into the state's own grid, the state had to take resort to short-term power purchases. And when you go to buy something in short term, it's almost buying in retail. You end up paying a much higher price. So the white paper also estimates the additional cost of this increased short-term purchases. Now, they say that at least to keep their heads above the water, to at least keep the business going, the state government or the state government corporations started borrowing. One, started buying short-term power, and second, started borrowing from whenever possible. In the process, they also say that the average domestic tariff went up from 3.87 rupees per unit to 5.63 rupees per unit. And they say, you see in this graphic, it shows you that the burden was the greatest on consumers at the lower levels. That is, people whose monthly bill was up to 101 rupees, that became 199 rupees. So it looks like 98%, but the base is low. When the base is low, percentages can be very high. Even with that proviso, it is quite clear that while the government kept on distributing some power for free, it kept on cancelling contracts, it kept on renegotiating things which had been negotiated in the past. Obviously, that outgoing government will have the argument that there was corruption in the earlier ones, that too much was being given in these power purchase agreements. I'm not discounting any of that, but as a consequence, everything got delayed and the costs of everything went up. The next sections in the white paper talk about inefficient governance, exponential increase in outstanding receivables. Now, power was being produced, power was being transmitted, it was being distributed, except that these corporations were not collecting their dues. And as those receivables went up, the increase in receivables from 2018-19 from 12,945 crores became 52,091 crores. That's an increase of 302%. This also includes government subsidy dues, which, as I mentioned to you earlier, had gone up from 7,680 crores to 12,681 crores, is 65%. All of these arrears then meant that these companies had no cash flows and no money. And the only way they could make up for any of that was by borrowing. In the meanwhile, a lot of the ongoing projects were delayed. So the Vijayawada thermal power plant, stage 5, unit 8 of 800 megawatts, that was commissioned in December 23 after a delay of how much? 55 months. When that happens, interest costs pile up, right? Costs overrun, all kinds of tamashas happen. And because you are not getting access to this power, which should have been yours, if people want power, you are buying power in the short run in retail from wherever it's available. So you end up paying more of that. It becomes a triple whammy: interest, cost overruns, and more expensive power. Then also there was a delay in the commissioning of the Krishnapatnam thermal power plant. There also it was at 800 megawatt unit, stage 2, unit 3. That was commissioned in March 23 after a 44-month delay. So did not quite reach the bar of the Vijayawada plant, which was 55 months, but this was 44 months. And again the implications were the same. Polavaram hydroelectric project I told you about, it was cancelled, it was rebid. Anybody whose earlier contracts were cancelled went to court. In many of these cases, courts, including the Supreme Court, the regulators, all gave orders against the state government. Arbitration processes also ended in a setback for the state government, and all that cost also kept piling up. In the process, also, the state government's corporations started losing, the white paper say, they started losing their credit ratings. And as the credit ratings went down, their interest costs went up. Because in the same process, the government also cancelled 21 wind energy power purchase agreements. Then they decided to rebid them. People who had signed those agreements, they protested. Central government got really worried that, we are selling this idea of renewable energy to all of the country. State governments have to buy this power. This power is available much cheaper. We are giving many concessions. So R.K. Singh, then Union Minister for Power and Renewable Energy Resources, he wrote a letter to the state government beseeching them to honor their commitments on the power purchase agreements from the wind and solar energy producers. The white paper has also appended a copy of that letter. You can see that letter on your screens as well. And all of this has led to a situation where the state now has power cuts. Growth in electricity consumption at 4.5% is among the lowest in the country. And then the white paper gives us a final figure. This is a telling chart, and I'm sharing it with you on your screens. Please see that. This just gives you a breakdown of the total losses of the power sector in Andhra Pradesh. How much does it add up to? 1,29,503 crores. That's almost 1.3 trillion rupees. All of this has happened in these 5 years. And as I read this, I find some other curious factors as well, on some of which I think you will find stories from our correspondent in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, Prasad Nichannametla, very soon. But one of these is, and I don't quite understand this, one of these is that while the government owed its companies so much money by way of its subsidy commitment and also its own electricity bills, its own power consumption, instead of paying these receivables to their own company, state government actually insisted that the generation company, AP Genco, and the transmission company, AP Transco, the only two companies that were liquid and that had some money, the distribution company was massively broke in any case. They forced both the companies to invest their employees' pension and gratuity trust funds and provident fund trust funds, their employees' pension and gratuity trust funds and provident fund trust funds in Andhra Pradesh State Beverages Corporation Limited, APS BCL bonds, carrying 8.5% interest rate. Now, you can't pay your companies what is their due, and you are forcing those companies to invest their employees' pension funds into another of your corporation's bonds. Now, state government guarantees those bonds, right? But how is it compensating the companies? And aren't you putting your own employees, these corporations' employees' pension funds at risk? The two companies invested, obviously the government's companies, they'll do what the government tells them to do. So they invested rupees 2,134 crores, that is for AP Genco, and 379 crores for AP Transco in these bonds. The coupon rate in the bonds, as I told you, was 8.5%. So a total amount of 2,513 crores was invested in these bonds. At least for now, first up, or as lawyers might say, prima facie, I'm not able to figure out the logic of this, but there has to be a logic to this. Remember one more thing. What does AP State Beverages Corporation Limited do? I went to their website. All I know is that everything they do has got something to do with liquor distribution, liquor sales. I don't know, liquor production. I also see a tender by them asking for some chromatographic machinery to check the quality of alcohol. So this is alcohol business. All of this is sounding a little bit murky to me. Beyond that, I can't say at this point because I don't know. Wait for Prasad Nichannametla's stories as they come out.